Okay. I think I'll start with you because you've got slightly more points.
Mhm.
Tell me about the saboteur archetype and Pressfield's resistance.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Obviously, I've put on our note page here. I've put just one line. So this is going to be a real test for me to try and elaborate. And this was a few days ago that I was writing about this stuff. So I'll get my booklet out in case I need it. Are you aware of Stephen Pressfield's idea around this term resistance? And it comes from his book, The War of Art. I feel like we've talked about it before. You might have even read it.
I have read it. Resistance being like the thing that's holding you back before with your productivity.
Yep. Yep. So I read an article. Well, actually, it started from me thinking about, isn't it so interesting that as human beings we can sabotage ourselves in life? We can do things we wish we didn't do. We can make decisions that don't have our best interest at heart. We can restrain ourselves from initiating change that is necessary, or we don't stop ourselves from a particular thought pattern or a pattern of action that's causing us significant pain. We just stay as we are. And it's like whether it's a consequence of wrong action or inaction, we we sabotage our possibility to live a better life. And it's so interesting because if we were completely in control of ourselves and our reality, then we wouldn't sabotage ourselves. So it suggests to me that we aren't the masters of our own psyche, we aren't the masters of our own internal kingdom, and that there's something going on. And I did a bit of research into it, and I found a article that I can share the link with you if you're interested in reading it, from a Jungian psychoanalyst talking about a saboteur archetype. Now, an archetype is, how's the best way to explain this? There are typical situations that human beings will pretty much universally experience. And an archetype is the way we mentally represent the pattern of behavior that one usually carries out in a typical situation. So the saboteur archetype represents how you're likely to think, feel, and behave in a situation where you sabotage yourself or you sabotage others, right? And a great example, I think the best way to explain archetypes is to put it in some kind of context. So we've all probably watched Disney's The Lion King, and there's Simba's uncle Scar, who is the evil character. He is the prime example of a saboteur, right? He is ruining Mufasa's reign over the kingdom. He leads, well, he leads Simba. He leads a situation that makes it look like Simba kills his own father, right? Which means the king's dead, and the heir to the throne of the king's son, has to be banished because of the bad thing he's done. Like Scar is, he sabotages the whole situation. There's a good thing going on, he ruins it. Now, the archetype of the saboteur can also be something we do to ourselves, right? We sabotage ourselves. We play that role of Uncle Scar in our own minds, in our own lives. And I was thinking about this, and it made me think, okay, is the saboteur archetype similar to Pressfield's idea of resistance? Pressfield talks about this force that you are possessed by that makes you procrastinate and distracts you from doing the work you need to do to move your life forward. And resistance happens because your ego just wants to maintain its control and maintain the status quo and doesn't like the idea of you growing. And these forces, like these, Pressfield sees that creative forces and inspiration are actually outside of ourselves. He sees them as sort of mystical entities that possess us and pass ideas into us. And so the ego doesn't want these forces to be changing us. The ego likes things to be as they are now because the ego is fundamentally anxious and defensive. It doesn't want things to change. And so what's the practical sort of application of all this waffle that I've just yapped? Well, I put this in a post on my YouTube channel, I think yesterday, and it's that it's really important to understand that there will be forces inside you that don't have your best interest at heart, that make you procrastinate, that make you make wrong decisions, that make you behave in ways that you don't want to, that stop you from making changes that could make your life better. And each time you notice that and you understand that point and you really sort of, I don't know, you absorb it and integrate it into the way you think about yourself and the world, then you start building a different voice, which understands that you can still do things despite the fact that you don't feel competent enough, or the resistance voice comes in, you get distracted. There is another voice you can make louder, a voice of reason, a voice of logic, and you don't always have to follow the the intentions of the internal saboteur, and you can overcome these forces. But to do that, you initially have to understand that they're there. So I've said a lot there. Tell me your thoughts.
I think it's something that we're aware of when it happens. I feel like in a lot of cases we're aware that we're sabotaging ourselves when we're doing it. It's just so overwhelming that we go through with it.
Mm.
And you ask, why are people doing that and giving into it? And it must be a weakness to overcome the resistance, in the same way that there's resistance with productivity, and that you're able to, the more you realize that is the start, that's the hardest thing often, and then you get in the routine and it becomes a habit. Then the same with when you understand that your lower self is talking to you, your animal self, and it wants you to do something bad. Once you overcome that a couple of times, it becomes a habit, and then it's just who you are.
Well, Pressfield talks about the solution to resistance being what he calls turning pro, which means showing up like you're a professional to the things that you care about, like showing up to write or to train or to practice anything, any new skill or hobby or profession that you're trying to do, showing up despite the fact that your brain might whisper in your ear about how you aren't good enough, or how it might not be the right path, or how people might perceive you. It's like it's hinting to the fact that sometimes we instantly, without questioning it, believe the things that the voices in our head tells us. Just because they're in our head, we think they are telling us the truth, and that's just how it is. But I don't think we can fully trust the way we think and feel most of the time. And like, if you think about it, that's Pressfield's angle. If you think about it in terms of the saboteur archetype, and we continue our use of the Lion King as kind of a symbolic narrative for this, Scar sabotages the kingdom and banishes Simba, right? And Simba goes out into the deeper jungle, and he meets these two humorous characters, these mentors, Timon and Pumbaa, who's like I think they're a meerkat and a wild boar. And he goes through the challenges of becoming an adolescent with them, and sort of adopts their philosophy for life, Hakuna Matata, do you know what I mean? Don't worry about things and stuff. But then what happens? Well, Simba decides to go back to the kingdom and still show up despite the saboteur being there. And eventually he defeats the saboteur. But that comes from the bravery to return back to the thing you sabotaged. Show up and battle against it. You know what I mean? Be a voice in response to it. So yeah.
I think there's a good. We have the ability to control our thoughts in some way. We don't have the ability to control them as they pop in. We can't decide that as maybe the muse or something pops in. But what we can do is we can have that thought and contradict it, and therefore we kind of can control its power. And so if you're able to do that, then you won't sabotage yourself.
Well, that's the joy and beauty of human self-awareness. It means that we can be stricken with painful levels of self-consciousness and have existential crises because of how self-aware we are as tiny creatures in an infinite universe. But one real benefit to it is there seems to be this meta perspective you can take about your thoughts. It's called metacognition, thinking about thoughts. You can detach, and you can kind of go above your own thinking and evaluate your own thoughts. And it's called cognitive reframing, this idea that you can think something, but then you can manipulate how you think about that thought. There's the spontaneous thought that comes into your mind. Then there's, if you have a level of conscious presence, your own evaluation of that thought and how you want to approach it. And then there's the action that comes subsequently. Organisms with no self-awareness or less self-awareness than us will just have the instinct, the spontaneous thought, the feeling, the impulse, the drive, and they'll just act. Whereas what's so interesting about human beings is we have this weird mindfulness gap where we can train that, and we can go, well, do we want to follow these thoughts? Do we want to justify these thoughts? Really useful stuff to know.
It's like perception is everything. It really is. I want to go into quite an interesting question that I think will conclude a lot of things. It will challenge me, but that we've kind of spoke about in the past, and it's about, does tranquility coexist with personal success, or does it require a detachment of worldly ambitions? Because I was thinking about this. What we want is peace. And does that come from when we've made it and we look back and are proud and can sort of relax a little bit because maybe we have to do a little less work? Or is it a turning point where you switch off from the world and you focus internally and you spend some time by yourself and get peace that way? And the kind of analogy that we've been talking about with the drill sergeant and Alan Watts, is this one spectrum in where you're trying to balance both, or is it two different spectrums where they're completely separate identities? So yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah, you're so right in that what we ultimately want is peace. We just want to be comfortable with who we are and how our life is going, and we want to have some stable, deep social connections and some tasks to do that make us feel good about life. That's what you want, fundamentally. All the material stuff that dances in front of that and sort of paints over that core desire is arbitrary, really. There are studies that show once you have enough money to survive and keep the bill collectors at bay, more money doesn't really make you considerably happier. It might give you freedom, in inverted commas, the kind of external freedom where you can fly to any country and you can pay for a restaurant meal 7 nights a week and things like this, which sounds great and is a vision that I would like for myself when I'm in a certain mood. But is that peace? I don't know if that's the same thing. Peace is an internal job. And if peace is your goal, and the drill sergeant's constant striving to work hard and don't switch off and be grinding every minute of the day, if that takes you away from peace, then you're sacrificing the thing you want in order to get it. It's that Chris Williamson notion that he's repeated hundreds of times about, happiness or peace or meaning, or whatever word you want to put in that slot. If you sacrifice that to work so that you can work enough to be happy or peaceful or find meaning in life, then you may as well just cut out the hard work and feel at peace and feel happy and feel meaningful. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done, but I think the answer to your question, we inherently know that material things or success is kind of a fleeting source of positive emotion. What makes you feel happy is the movement towards it. And so I think a better question is, can you be peaceful and ambitious? Like, we need a word for that. We need an archetype for that. We need an instruction manual of how we do that. How can you be ambitious and be content at the same time? They seem like two opposites, but I feel like there could be a middle point. And I like what you're saying about the spectrum in terms of it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. Maybe there's a drill sergeant that works hard during 6 hours of the day, but then the other 6 hours of the day he puts on a robe and meditates and writes philosophy and reads poetry. Maybe there's a guy that has both entities in him at once. He is both things.
I think I agree with you in that should be work and peace rather than work then peace. You don't want to kind of say to yourself, I will allow myself to live in a tranquil state after I've achieved something. Because it's a temptation, like, it's important for us to maintain that as we're coming up in the world rather than working all the time and then selling a business and going and then just relaxing on a beach. I think it's nice to have this kind of coexistence, and there's this absolute beautiful analogy that I've read recently from Schopenhauer where he says life is like a balloon, and what we're doing is we're constantly filling it with air. And obviously it's a good analogy because the balloon pops, which is kind of when your death is. But the size of the balloon is kind of like we're filling it with this worldliness, always kind of filling it, where we're kind of exhausted with how much we're sort of blowing into it, and all these possessions grow the size of this balloon. And the better way to kind of live, I think, is to fill it a little bit and then just glide.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I think one point that popped into my head as you were speaking was I don't think peace and work have to be enemies. I think there are parts of my work, in inverted commas, that bring me a lot of peace, and that maintaining and finding a state of peace takes work. You have to be consistent with a number of habits. You have to keep yourself on the straight and narrow path. And for example, when I do like my most difficult physical training of the week, there's a level of clarity that I get after that hour and a half of real physical work that I don't get in other areas of my life. And it's like, okay, well, I've done the real hard work, and peace has come as a byproduct, and that's a reliable system. That's usually the case week in, week out. And that's how I feel. And so maybe peace and work shouldn't be seen as enemies or opposites. They're inherently linked, and you just have to find a sweet spot in how you approach life. That you don't work so hard that you forget that there is peace out there to be gained from your work. It just becomes work. It just becomes a battle. You grit your teeth and get through it, but you lose the clarity that you can get from it, I guess.
How do you make your work peaceful though? Because I'm guessing that your basketball grunt work sessions, they're not peaceful.
No, but that's the exact point I'm making though. They're not peaceful in the moment, but the amount of peace I feel as a consequence of doing them.
Right.
Like when I get in the shower afterwards, and then I'm driving back, and there's the rest of the day, and I have this aspect of myself that knows that I did hard things today. I did things that I didn't want to do, that were meaningful, that moved me forward to a worthy goal, that brings me a whole lot of peace. So, and then there is a kind of, when I finish my final set of sprints in that session, I'm breathing deeply and I'm soaked in sweat and I've snotted all over my lap. There's a peace in that. It's like, I know Rogan's talked loads about it, that when you exercise really, like to a really strenuous extent, all the other bullshit in life just kind of fades away.
This physiological kind of state that you're proud of yourself. So yeah, maybe.
Well, sorry, I'll just add before you go on there. I think about it. I think about ancestral man. Our tribal ancestors. when they really push themselves. I mean, this is just, I wasn't there, do you know what I mean? And I haven't read up on, the ins and outs of our ancestors tens of thousands of years ago. This is just off my own vision of it. But you went out and hunted an animal, or you protected your territory in a fight with another tribe or whatever, and you pushed yourself physically. You might have even got seriously hurt, or you went to war with yourself and others. Then you'd come back to the fire, you'd eat, and you'd rest, and you'd feel a level of peace because you protected your village and your loved ones and your children and your partners. And I see that on a very micro scale in doing things like grunt work.
So I think the kind of solution is, whereas I pose sort of two options of, it's either you allow yourself peace after 5 years of grinding, or you link them together. I think the link together is daily, in that you allow yourself some kind of to be at some intense, fiery frequency, and then after you've done that, you've the peace feels better, or it comes automatically as a result. A sprint and then rest.
Yeah. I think it's an important question, man. For ambitious people that are very conscientious and wired and want to work and achieve, it's an inevitable point they'll come to when they question, what is all this for? I thought this would make me feel good, but it doesn't. And then it's like, okay, well, I don't want to give up on my ambitions, but I also want to feel mentally stable and positive in that process. So it's a very important point.
Tell me about why home is a psychological, spiritual state.
So yeah, I began a module this week. Well, I didn't actually go to the lecture, but I caught up on the work independently. It's an environmental psychology. Now, when I picked it, because it was an optional module, I was worried it was going to be like heavily tilted towards looking at like climate change issues and ecological problems and all that kind of stuff, which, has its time and place, but isn't really one of my top interests in life. But fortunately, a lot of it seems to be, environmental psychology as a field is about it's about the interrelationship between our environment, is a very broad term, and our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And that environment can go from the individual level, like our private spaces, like our homes in our houses, and our families in that house, and can go on a wider and wider scale to our neighborhoods and our towns and our societies and our nations, and etc., etc. But we were told to read an article, environmental psychology article, about first year university students moving from home to university accommodation and all the psychological outcomes associated with that. And the paper itself wasn't really too interesting. It was well written, but it kind of just came out with a lot of common sense principles that you'd imagine. But it had this bit about home, and it's defined home in the best way I've ever heard it before. And I'm actually going to read it to you. And I don't know if I can send you this screenshot. You might want to put it on screen for people or something. Just give me a moment, because I've got to pop back into my Notion page. And then this morning I elaborated on reading this and sort of put it into some of my own words.
You don't have to send it to me. I can edit it in.
So it said, the concept of home transcends the material characteristics of domestic space. It is a space that people have made meaningful, situated geographically and socially, imbued with deep feelings and vested with emotion. The very concept of home suggests that it is a key element in the development of people's sense of themselves as belonging to a place. Home is a focal point of one's experiential space, the central reference point of human existence, serving as a unique place of familiar, known, and predictable activities, people, and physical elements. This importance of home is emphasized through the state of well-being many experience following its presence, vicinity, or accessibility, and the state of distress created through its absence, remoteness, or inaccessibility. Now, that's a lot of waffle. But what I gathered from that the profound bit I gathered from that was this quote from a paper from the mid 1970s, where the guy said that home is the central reference point of human existence. And that made me think, okay, well, maybe it doesn't have to be a physical place. Maybe in the physical realm, our reference point is our childhood home or where we're currently living or whatever, right? The home we own. But is that really the central reference point of your existence? I don't know. Maybe the central reference point of your existence is something psychological or spiritual. Maybe it's a person, right? Maybe it's your significant other. Maybe it's your mother or father. Maybe it's your closest friend. Or maybe it's your own mind or your own heart, your own intuition, or whatever you think of when I say the word soul. Or maybe it's a set of values and principles for who you are and what your life is about, a kind of philosophical textbook that's in your own brain. And I go, well, that definition resonates with me a whole lot more. And it links to something I think I didn't talk about on the podcast, I don't think, but I talked about in a video, the first vlog that's going to be posted, which is in Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. I think it's section 4.3. He talks about the fact that men seek restoration in physical spaces, like going to the countryside or whatever, going to the ocean, to get some respite from the stress and chaos of their life. But he said that the best thing to do is going into yourself, where there'll be a few central and most significant doctrines and philosophies that you can remind yourself of and sort of reorient your mindset and your approach to reality, so that when you go back into whatever distressing or chaotic situation you have to encounter, you come at it with a level of peace and perspective. And I really like that. So for me, I think about, where's my home right now? Well, my childhood home doesn't really feel like my home anymore. It's a place I can go and sleep, and it's a place where my loved ones live. And where I am in London right now isn't really a home. It's somewhere I can sleep and stay, and it's inhabited by people I like and that I get on with really well. But it's not home. For me, home right now is where my heart is. It's my philosophies for life. It's my spirit. It's my mind. And maybe when I have my own family and my own established home is a physical space, I'll feel differently about that. But I just really liked playing with these ideas. So what do you think?
It reminds me of Peterson's Clean Your Room. And that when he kind of talks about it, I also take interpretations that the room represents the mind or has links with it. Like, are there dragons in it? Does it need to be tidied? How can you conquer the world without even tidying your room first? I think it could represent some sort of average day, or the forces in the average day. I think you're right with the kind of relationships and your own beliefs on how it's kind of guided. And I also, when you read out that thing from the paper, the quote I also picked up is the central space of human existence. And yeah, it seems to be a load of ideologies that are formed up from some sort of previous memories that then guides how you approach the day.
Yeah, it's like we go out into the unknown every day. You might do things that you think are mundane, but you're still leaving a more predictable environment. You're going to the supermarket, or you're going to train at the gym, or you're going to your office where you work, and you'll encounter people there and be confronted with tasks to do and battles to take on and dragons to slay. But home is where you exit to go into the unknown. It's known territory. It's the central reference point. It's the place of security. And my argument is, yes, that's a physical place, but also it can be a mental place as well.
So what would that look like for kind of your restoration and...
Well, it's like, I think I've developed a couple of ideas about life that I believe are true on a very deep level. The idea that you don't have to take any of this too seriously, that you can work hard, but you can let go of gripping onto any outcome anyway, because I don't really identify with the ego that is Joel Clifton, this persona, this character that I play out in the world. I believe that what I am is the spirit beneath that, the soul, the awareness. And so if I get too caught up in the distress and the chaos of external human life, I can return back to the reference point of that philosophy, that I am the spirit that possesses this character. And through doing that, to returning home to that set of values and set of principles, I find restoration. Does that make sense?
So it's kind of like a core value, your core values, and
Yeah,
you go to a place that adds chaos, and you're able to then return to your core values, which teach you then how to approach it.
exactly. And there's this quote that we all are aware of that goes, "Home is where the heart is." And you might think about that as, okay, that means home is where the people you love are, or where the things you love are. Okay, that's a good perspective. But but also maybe your heart is your intuition and your spirit and your soul, right? And home is where that is. Where what does your intuition guide you to do and think and feel? You know, how would your spiritual self orient you? What does that value? What does your awareness deep within all the material world bullshit? What does that value? That's what home is. Home is where that heart is. I like it a lot. I like that as an idea.
And it's like the soul is the human's GPS.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And the more you connect with it, the more it leads you on the right path. You know, the more you listen to things outside of you, the more inauthentic your life becomes. Because it's not your uniqueness, it's not the GPS system that's deep within you that's forming your intentions and your motivations. It's always you just being captured by shit around you and trying to fit in and trying to avoid discomfort and uncertainty and anxiety, when there is something that guides you from within. That's what I feel anyway. It's my personal belief and the belief of many others that there is something in you that guides you, and you just have to be quiet and still enough to listen to it.
I think there's also links to the boat analogy of you're just this guy on a boat, and the wind and the tide kind of smashes you in different directions, but the core stability and build around the boat and the strength of the oars and your manpower behind directing it is what's going to keep you going in the right direction. Yeah, I like that point. I'm going to try and talk about this point of will and drive. Both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer have this idea of a will and drive, and that it's a kind of something that all humans have inside of them, and it's also referred to as kind of like a life force. Also, I think as a will to power in Nietzsche's work, and I'm interested in how that is related to the alignment, in a way of kind of this spiritual idea of keeping aligned. So,
Aligned with what?
kind of what you're supposed to do in life, like your mission as a person and how that's created and discovered and developed, because you can feel when you're not aligned a little bit and you're not doing the right thing. So there's Nietzsche says that there's kind of a stage that people get to where he calls it the Übermensch, where you move from society's values to your own values, and this is kind of the first stage of it. So me and you, maybe this was when we were in our late teens, and we realised that the outside external world is a lie. Well, there's values that we don't like, and we develop our own values. And then I feel like you also, somewhere in that space, you develop this kind of higher self, and you start moving towards it, and then that becomes this alignment. I don't actually know how that forms, but there's also maybe a link to in moving towards it, there's this sort of mental, spiritual idea of manifestation, but you can also kind of refer to it as like I've started believing in this idea because it's also the same as placebo. That's just what an atheist would call it, or a theist would call it prayer. Like it's all the same thing of like this is what I'm going to do tomorrow, and I'm then going to align myself towards moving towards it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm going to call it manifesting. And then I feel like, okay, this idea of alignment, how does it come about? Why are we aligned to certain things? And I think it comes back to everyone's choice of how they cure their boredom. And if we agree with this Schopenhauer idea that life is an oscillation between boredom and suffering, what you're basically doing is you're moving out of boredom into the suffering in some part. And that's kind of going to choose where you go and why. And I spoke about this before, in that people aren't bored enough, so then they never kind of find this overall direction and drive within them because they're too much focused on instant gratification, so they're not bored. And so people never feel aligned to a mission or anything. And then there's this kind of Alan Watts idea that also comes into it, in that life is a dance. And that's what we're basically doing with this will, this drive. We're dancing through in our own unique way. And you know you're aligned because it's harmonious. It's like the distance between the dance is just right for the music. And the closer the music and the dance are together is when you're on truth. So yeah, what's your thoughts?
I think that was quite nice, Jake. I think you articulated that really well. I love that idea that you get to a point where you notice that you don't align with society's values or the values imprinted on you by, I don't know, your upbringing or your school system or your culture, and you start developing your own values on who you are and what matters. And then all those values culminate to this vision of who you could be if you embodied all of those values. And that becomes your ideal, or your higher self, as you call it. And it's so true. I think I talked about it in a video a couple of months back where I used the analogy of Mario Kart on the Nintendo DS, when you used to do time trials, right? And there would be this, like, the world #1 ranked Mario Kart player, and you could do a time trial against him, but he was like a ghost character that would always be quicker than you in the race, right? And you're playing your POV, you're your player, and you see this perfect time trial of this ghost-like character doing the race doing the corners perfectly, and using the kind of, when you can what's the word, you can sort of grind. I think it's like a handbrake grind round corners to get an extra bit of power or whatever it is. You're watching that happen ahead of you. Well, that's you in your life. When you develop this kind of vision, this higher self, this higher being, this higher version of you that you'd like to live up to, you always see it kind of just ahead of you in the race in your life. You don't quite meet up to it because you are imperfect, and you will fall off the straight and narrow path from time to time. But you have a vision that you'd like to live up to. I really like that. And then our will, our psychic energy, as Jung calls it, our libido, is the force that compels us to try and be that guy, to try and be that fully integrated, valuable individual. And it's, yeah, really nice. Really nice. And I had one extra thought now that's just flown out of my head. What was the last thing you said? You talked about the oscillation between suffering and boredom.
The dance of Alan Watts. And
the dance, yes. And this is it. I want to just expand on that analogy. Really, really nice. The music, let's say you're listening to a beautiful piece of classical music, and we're seeing that as the ideal self, because that music is transcendent, it's mystical, it's awe-inspiring, it's sublime, right? And what we're doing is we're just trying to dance along to the music. We're trying to move along in the right manner, move our bodies and be one with the vibration, the frequency of the tune. And that's what we're doing in our lives. We have this higher self that represents the music, and we have us that represents the dancer, and we just want to align with that. We want to dance. We want to dance along to the tune of life, and we want the music and the soundtrack of our life to be the most beautiful, most transcendent, most sublime piece of art it can possibly be. And that's how you live the optimal human experience. And it sounds really wishy-washy and metaphorical, but I get it. I feel it.
In the same way that you don't know when the music ends, or you don't know what the next note's going to be, no one knows what they're doing. So
Yeah.
we're absolutely relying on this will to guide us. There's the only people that differ is kind of maybe more religious perspective, in that they're given values rather than kind of discovering your own, and then that's a different kind of journey. But in this notion of existentialism, it's about the discovery of the meaning at the end of it. And
what I love about Alan Watts' idea about the dance is that it's so true. When you're dancing, you can't be thinking about the move you're going to make in 5 seconds' time. You are completely in the present moment. It's almost like your body's possessed by the music, and you're using your intuition and your heart and your life force to guide you. So it's not only an analogy that links into this sort of higher self ideal notion, but it also points to the present moment as the anchor point of doing that. That if you focus on the present moment, you dance along to the current beats of the song, then the whole performance takes care of itself.
And I heard this nice thing the other day, that there will be, in the moments that you and the music are off a little bit, success is moving from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. In that, you need to get back into the right vibration without kind of directing you onto a different music, onto kind of, yeah, just stay in your own unique dance.
Mm.
But yeah.
Yeah, don't just... It's not really nice, man. Really nice. We've probably got time for one more, haven't we? Have you got one more, or shall I go into one of mine? What have I got?
We'll do one
I've
more
got
each.
two more left of mine. Okay, go on. Am I going now? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I will... Let's go...
I'll go with... Well, go on. You were going to choose between the two.
I'm interested in Freud's dream. Is it? Yeah, Purpose of Dreams.
Dreams, yeah. Yeah, so this is a smaller point than the other one, which I think is right because I need to go in about 20 minutes or so. So I was thinking about the purpose of dreams. Now, there's a wide range of perspectives that people have. There's the perspective that they are just random stories in your head that you experience when you're falling asleep and have no meaning. There are many people in that camp that think there's nothing to dreams, nothing significant to them. Then there's the camp of dreams are your unconscious talking to you, which I used to say that for years, that that's what I thought it was. And I realized that's kind of pointing at the truth, but I think there's a more sophisticated way I can explain it. And that's what I've tried to come to this week. Now, Freud's idea about dreams was that they are all about he called it wish fulfillment. So what a dream does is it shows you the desires that you're currently repressing in your life that you are wishing to fulfill. And Freud was a very messed up guy, right? He thought that a lot of psychic life was about sexual gratification. So he thought a lot of dreams were just symbolic narratives and imagery trying to get across to you, or this desire for some sort of sexual gratification manifesting in a dream and some kind of symbolic story. But it could be I don't know, some situation in your work life or in your relationships. And Freud said that the dream is where you fulfill that wish. So, I don't know, you could murder somebody in a dream, and that is a reflection on your wish to have power over other people in your work life or something. Freud saw it in a very symbolic way. Interesting. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% accurate, but I think there's some truth in it, that sometimes our desires in life appear to us in dreams when we don't want to address them consciously. I think that happens. But then there was this guy called Fairbairn, who had this quote where he said, dreams are, and I quote, dramatizations of situations in internal reality. All right, what does that mean? So that means that there's a conscious you that experiences life, and there's like the internal you. And the situations that the internal you experience can't really be explained in words. And it's not always easy for that information to pass through from the unconscious to your conscious ego. And so what the dream is like a story, a narrative, a movie, a dramatization of what's going on in your unconscious internal life, to sort of let your conscious know, let your ego know of what's really going on, rather than what they would like it to be. And as I've put in this point, providing alternative perspectives to the ego. You think something is one way in your life, and a dream kind of dramatizes what's really going on. And that a lot of that is unconscious. A lot of that is the shadow, the things that we don't want to look at because they're uncomfortable or they cause us anxiety, etc. Now, I'll finish up by using one example. I started to realize as I was writing about it that I've been having a lot of recurring dreams about bridges. Now, whether it's me traveling from one bridge to another, from one place to another using a bridge, or seeing a bridge that leads to sort of a big set of fog. That was one dream I had, of just this big bridge that just, you couldn't see the end of it. It was just fog. And I had another dream the other night that I went to Disneyland, but it wasn't like Disneyland on Earth. It was like this massive bridge that led to this new planet where everything was like a massive theme park type thing. And I was like, why am I dreaming of bridges? Well, from a Freudian perspective, maybe I'm dreaming of bridges because I'm trying to fulfill the wish of leaving my current reality. I want to get away from my current situation, whether that be a feeling psychologically or an actual physical circumstance. But if we look at it from Fairbairn's point of view, that it's a dramatization of internal reality, maybe I feel like I'm on a bridge right now. Like I feel like I'm either between two distinct life chapters, or I'm on the bridge towards what I really want in life. I'm on a bridge towards making it as the guy that I want to be. I'm on the bridge towards becoming that higher self. Or I exist on a bridge. Joel Clifton exists on a bridge between the human realm and the spiritual realm. He feels like he has 1 foot in each, and he's on that bridge. Does that make sense? So I've developed my perspective on what I think the purpose of dreams are, and that's a little example. So what do you think?
Very interesting. I think who knows what the interpretation of the bridge could be. For me, from hearing it, it seems like you're crossing the line between what you were and who you're going to become. You're kind of doing that now. I just want to get a bit more understanding about the kind of points and what you said you think dreams are. So it's your reality reflected to you unconsciously, whereas before you thought of it as like a Jungian, unconsciously still, but maybe more sort of desire. Oh no, that's Freud. More desires and.
Yeah, so I do think it's still the unconscious communicating with you.
Yeah.
But I've sort of made my perspective on that more sophisticated. So you've got your ego, which is whatever you refer to when you say the word I, your conscious you that exists out in the world, right? And your ego has a set of beliefs about reality, the way it thinks things are, right? And the ego is very defensive and very anxious and doesn't like uncertainty and doesn't like change. It doesn't like its beliefs about reality to change because that makes it anxious, right? That's the kind of link. And Fairbairn's point was that dreams are how the mind creates a narrative to explain to the ego what's really going on inside. So let's say, I don't know, let's use an example. Let's say you aren't happy with your current life circumstance. You hate your job, or you're in a relationship that's toxic or whatever. your ego might convince you that, or your ego might exist with this belief that things are okay, ignoring the dragon, brushing the monster under the carpet type vibe. Whereas you might have a traumatic dream, and then that's a narrative or a use of imagery and a dramatization of what's really going on to try and confront you with that alternative perspective that things aren't actually okay. Does that make sense? It's showing you how things are rather than how your ego wants them to be. That was what the article was about.
Yeah. So, because for instance, like, there are different types of dreams as well, because there's the actual going to sleep dreaming, and then there's also you daydreaming in the day about some future self that you're going to try and achieve. And the way that you put that just then, if you're daydreaming about some future self that you want to be, then, which I think that's a normal thing. I do it, and that would suggest that that's talking to your ego about what he's got to get done, and the real sort of inputs that you're going to have to get done, because it's not just the ego, because you then kind of reflect on that and you think, well, yeah, I'm a bit lost actually. I will also say I haven't had a bad dream in ages, so
Neither have I, actually, since I was a kid.
yeah, like it's been a couple of years. So maybe that might say something. I mean, if you're getting bad dreams, does that mean you're doing stuff wrong? Um, like I used to.
Well, if we take this perspective, if you have bad dreams, there is something in your internal reality that's not right, that you're not addressing for whatever reason. That might not be your fault, but I think it's true. I think you've got big dragons in your life. They will appear in your unconscious. And your unconscious is sort of the manifestations of your unconscious, which dreams are a key aspect of that, and daydreams are the same thing. And I think it's true, man. And maybe, I used to have nightmares as a kid. I remember they were recurring, spiders and this one sort of, I remember this lady, who's kind of like, have you seen 101 Dalmatians? There's this Cruella de Vil figure who's like this evil lady that wants to steal the dogs to make clothes and stuff. There was always this female character that would appear in my nightmares, kind of like Cruella de Vil vibe. And that was a recurring one throughout my childhood. I haven't had those dreams ever, like since I was, I don't know, 8 years old. It's interesting.
You said internal reality. That is kind of a reflection of, but wouldn't like sort of watching a horror movie and then having a bad dream about that kind of be an external thing?
That's a good question. You watch a horror movie and then have a nightmare about it.
But then there's the reason why you're scared about it, which is internal.
Yeah, that stumped me a little bit. That's a good point. I mean, why do we find horror films scary? We know the things that we're watching aren't real. Like the clown that eats children doesn't actually exist. It's a fictional story written by Stephen King, right? But for some reason, it terrifies us. That's an interesting point.
But it's also an individual thing, isn't it? Because like you wouldn't get scared about the same thing necessarily 10 years later, and different people get scared about different things. So is it really the thing that's scary, or is it you that's being, or is it your fear? I'd lean towards
interesting.
And that people just have sort of similarities in fears. But yeah, I like that dream point. I'm gonna when I edit it, I'm gonna pay close attention, because that quite a little bit beyond me, maybe, I don't know, but it was very interesting.
Good.
I'll move on to my last point. Are you familiar with a book called Metamorphosis by Kafka?
Yeah, isn't it like a story about a guy who becomes a beetle?
Yeah, so I read it, and the interesting, it's quite good. I think there's more to it than people. Then like if you haven't read it and you kind of just interpret it, and from not reading it. Kafka was also someone that never saw like the success of his books, which I think a lot of the best ones come from. Because when he died, all of his stuff came from got popular, and you're then kind of writing for just sort of your own imagination and theories and stuff, rather than sort of for wealth or for success, which is also interesting. If some people take more of a sort of political stance on the book and what it kind of says about the workplace and capitalism and stuff, I sort of more took it as I tried to take interpretations that were more linked sort of between like relationships. So basically, what happens in the book? I'm going to spoil it so people can like skip if they want to stop listening and not have me spoil it. But so a guy turns into a beetle, and he's like a big provider into the house. I haven't actually finished it all, but I've got enough understanding to explain it. Guy turns into a beetle, and then slowly, everyone around him, like, starts to separate themselves from him. So he's in a house with his family, and they lock him in a room, and
do they realise that he's the beetle, by the way, or
Yeah.
do they think the guy's like gone missing?
Yeah, they
do.
They see
They
him
know.
as a beetle, like a massive beetle. So he's also like
Oh,
not very
right.
nice, not very nice to look at. And
Right,
this
okay.
guy also has a job, and so the workplace drop him, and so his family, the only time they see him is to feed him, and it's just a sister that does that. But then slowly, like they become more like less and less involved with him. So they go like 2 months, and they don't even like in the house. The house is like silent, so it's like there's the mother, the father, the guy that's now a beetle. So I think that's the son and the sister, and the relationship in the house like is very silent. They don't really talk about him at all for like 2 months, and they kind of pretend he doesn't exist outside of feeding him. And eventually, they just when the father's at work, the mother and sister decide to sort of go into the room together because the only one that had been involved with him is the sister. And then the mum faints, and the dad comes back and basically like thinks that he's a monster straight away, and so he lashes out and like hurts the beetle a lot. So that's kind of the point. I haven't finished it yet, but all the interpretations from reading it was that it kind of it reminded me a little bit of Peterson, and when like there's the interpretation of when there's like a fire that then grows to be a full-fledged dragon. That's what happens when you ignore something, and that's what they did. They ignored the beetle they for like months. And then there's like how the family treated him, the interpretation, which is like how society how society treat those that are different, and that differentiate from the norm, and that the work drops him. That people don't want anything involved with something that's like a little bit weird. And then you might think, or a bit, or also a bit of a burden. And then you might think like, why is this story so important? One of the cool things is the reason that he turned into a beetle was never explained. Which that interpretation is, well, it could happen at any time. You could become a massive beetle. You could become a big burden. And the beetle could have many sort of interpretations of maybe you're trying to live a truth and those around you don't like it, don't accept it. It could represent one day getting into a car crash and then becoming a burden to your family. and you can no longer like pay the rent. You still there? Your phone's died, I think. Oh, hello. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.